It's been another exciting week in the land of Bitshares. A lot of people have been worried about the share price tanking. A lot of people have been worried about marketing direction and overall what's going on. So lots of uncertainty in the space right now. But this too shall pass. We are consolidating on a much clearer foundation, and we'll be moving ahead in the weeks and months ahead with a much clearer, unified vision, a unified marketing approach, and a decentralized development process. So I guess I would like to see what people want to talk about today. What is on your minds, and I'm here to answer questions. I would like to start doing more discussions in Mumble than on the forum, at least for the discussion of new ideas. The forum is very controversial, and things can get taken out of context and overblown and affect the share price entirely more than I would like. So I think that the Mumble sessions will be a great way for delegates to coordinate, and I would like to encourage all delegates who are paid delegates to appear in the Mumble sessions. And I'm also going to try to get our development team to sit in a Mumble room. I don't know if we can have like an invite-only room, just so that developers can talk to each other at any time, regardless of where they are in the world.
That shouldn't be a problem. What we can do, and this is actually, you have the ability right now, Bytemaster, you are an administrator in the server. You can right-click somewhere, like say for instance under conference hall, and you can add, and then you can actually add a new room, make it temporary. You can make a password for it, and then as soon as everybody leaves it or exits it, it will remove itself. So we can put something that's a static room in here and leave it, or you could, or anybody really can, if they ask me, and I know that they're not, they have a little bit of trust in the community. I will be a little bit picky with it, but I'm not going to be over the top, so to speak.
Right. I want to allow people to communicate frequently and fluently. We have many different projects, and we're going to have many new players coming on board as delegates. Methodx will be doing marketing. We have someone else today just posted their start of a web-based exchange that uses basically blockchain info for Bitshares. And they're like to do that. I think that's a great project. There are lots of marketing ideas that we are working on that could be discussed. And with people all over the world, we need to vet delegates by having them come on here and talk to us. That's one way to provide some security for delegates to make sure they're not sock puppets, is to have them come on the mobile session and tell us what they're all about.
I personally think it's a great idea. I've asked myself, and I haven't asked you yet or said it on the forums, but I think there are many times when it sounded like you've made an announcement to people, and they thought that something was set in stone, and then just went out and went crazy selling off their shares, or became frustrated and started telling other people about it, and it becomes almost a ripple effect. So having an efficient communication channel where you can kind of vet ideas and get the opinions of the community before posting things would probably not be a bad way of going about it. So I'll work with you in any way I can to make sure that happens. Brent, I saw your lips turn on.
All right, so someone asked the question, is Methodx working for i3? And the answer is that fewer and fewer people are going to be working for i3, and more people are going to be independent actors, not subject to i3 at all. So Methodx is being nominated by the community to head up a marketing effort in other countries. Spanish-speaking countries, I believe, is where he's wanting to focus, and I fully support his attempts to do that. But just because I support him doesn't mean he's working for i3. As rapidly as possible, I would like i3 to wrap up its original mission, which was the creation of Bitshares. Bitshares is out there. It is self-sustaining. It is self-funding. i3 will have completed its mission by the end of this year is our goal. And that means that Bitshares now is going to still be led and developed and improved upon by the same people that used to work for i3, but we will now be operating together, working as a team with everyone on the forum. Like, we're all part of one giant team here trying to make Bitshares the best it can be. And I want this to be less and less about i3, because I think a lot of people view i3 as a point of centralization, a point of weakness. Other people view i3 as a point of strength. They view the centralization as a point of strength. And that's why every post we make pisses someone off. We either make people happy that are asking us to decentralize, and we make people happy that don't like companies, or we make people happy that like companies and piss off the other half of the people out there. So the problem is, it doesn't matter what we do, what we say, we're always going to upset some group of people. We are trying our best to make this about the greater whole and to adopt all viewpoints simultaneously. Let's try to look at it from everyone's perspective, and not declare this is how you have to view Bitshares. Bitshares is what it is. It is not what I call it. It is not what someone else calls it. It just is. Kind of like Bitcoin. You can call Bitcoin a currency. You can call it property. You can call it a company. You can call it a community. Bitcoin is all those things. Bitcoin doesn't have Satoshi telling everyone what to call it. So, as much as possible, I'm going to avoid telling people what to call Bitshares. What I choose to call it is, and describe it as, is just one perspective. It's the perspective that I'm operating under, but that does not mean that that is what it is. And the marketing guys out there are going to be marketing it to people in a way that reaches them. Some people, traders, capitalists, startup entrepreneurs, they really like the company metaphor, and you want to market to those people with that metaphor. On the other hand, there's a whole group of people that think corporations are evil and represent everything that, Bitcoin was supposed to stop corporations, stop this, and here we are creating a giant corporation. They don't like that. We need to adopt the perspective for each audience. Let each person view it in a way that makes sense to them, that they value. And this is all, of course, just my opinion. And I'm trying to make sure that I can lead, but not control the direction of Bitshares. I don't want to be a slave master. I want to inspire people to make Bitshares the best it can be. And So it's very complex, and the marketing guys out there are working on ways of expressing what I'm trying to say in a way that's palatable to the most people and the market.
So let me ask you, Bytemaster, what is the role of vote in terms of the internal politics or the internal structure of the Bitshares community? It seems like that's a very important aspect of what we need going forward, because some of this controversy might have been avoided to a degree if we had the ability to vote on various things, so that the community's sentiments could be not only could be quantified as well as understood.
Vote is a complex subject. The primary role of vote is to create is not so much on the blockchain side of things, but more on the user acquisition side of things. There are voting concepts that we can implement on the blockchain, but I definitely don't want to move to a one person, one vote mindset that separates voting power from capital. That's a recipe for disaster. That's what we have with the dollar today. Now, voting power needs to be proportional to capital stake. As far as reaching consensus, there are theoretical things we can do where if there's some big proposal, we can allocate a token of 1 token per share to everyone and say, once there is 75% agreement of all tokens, then we can make a decision, and then we allow people to buy and sell the tokens on the internal market. The goal being that we have much higher level consensus, 75%, and those who are against it can get compensated for the damages they think such a proposal is going to cause to their position. Having much higher level of consensus is much better than a 51% policy. But the actual role of like basic voting stuff we're working with Adam on and with voting officials is not going to require changes to the blockchain to implement.
So you're kind of talking about a weighted voting system where it's weighted based on how much stake you have in the system, but not a majority-based system. But you did describe something with, you gave the example of 75% in some token that would be representative of whatever issue you're trying to decide or vote on.
Right. We issue a token based on a snapshot date of the issue, and everyone is responsible for voting their token or selling their token for someone to vote for them. That's the best way to reach consensus in my view, and by having it something high like 75% is much better than just saying, 51%, screw the minority. In this case, the minority is voluntarily selling out their position in order to reach a consensus, and they're being compensated accordingly. A really bad idea will require a very hefty sellout price. Ideas that are less controversial will have a lower sellout price. The infrastructure to implement that is probably a ways off. We're talking months, maybe next summer, 6 months or so, just because our near-term priorities are lightweight clients and web interfaces and mobile. There's been some questions about the SuperDAC and all the features and our roadmap. I would like to add that Toast has convinced me of the need to focus on our core features first. Make sure the bitAssets are solid, make sure all these things are solid before we start adding all the features of all the other DACs into it. This is a big benefit of going to just the Bitshares, is that we can focus on our core product while having everyone on board, rather than having to immediately divide up and divide our energies on all the different subsystems. We need to focus so we can get hot enough so that we can grow. If we spread ourselves out too much, it's going to be like a fire, it's going to go out. And that's what I want to do, is focus on bitAssets, make them usable, and then grow out from there.
Kind of along the lines of what Brent Alsop was introducing in the forum about arriving at consensus. You've really helped me a lot in this, what you just said, Bytemaster, with regard to, I was always thinking vote was going to be very important in terms of achieving consensus and in setting a direction going forward. But you've explained very well why that isn't the case and why it's technically a difficult thing to achieve and why we should be moving to do more core infrastructure projects rather than focus on vote.
Right. If there is a major decision that needs to be made in the future, on the order of magnitude of the merger, then we should implement vote first, and then have the hard fork be based upon the passage of the vote. So that's in the short term, we've got working bitAssets, and I can't emphasize this enough, that we have a working product in bitAssets. The markets are relatively illiquid, relatively few people know about it, and the infrastructure to make them usable on and off ramps are still being developed. bitAssets have been around for a month and a half, 2 months, but in their final form, with the interest paid by shorts, they've only been around for less than a week. So let's keep some perspective on where we are. We've got a working product, and that product is going to have significant impact. That's the whole point. That's the 99% of the value proposition of what we're doing at this point in time, is the existence of bitAssets. And that's why we are going to focus on the bitAssets and making them usable in more and more places, more and more accessible. The more accessible we make it, the more users we can bring in, the faster we can grow.
That's great. Yeah, I think that what Bytemaster is focused on is great, but in my opinion, this voting idea is critically important too. And I would like to be involved in helping that go forward. Just because Bytemaster is focused on that doesn't mean the rest of us can get involved in helping with doing the voting. And also, I think voting is the wrong kind of terminology to use, because we need something more than voting. We need a consensus building system, because once you start a vote, you have to define what you're voting on, you have to define the choices, and all that's fixed in stone. And once the first vote is cast, that can't change. And we need something more than that. We need something that can change and modify over time, and we need something anyone can contribute and change, and the consensus can swing real fast. And we need, and Bytemaster talks about the people in the minority we need to get them on board so that we can achieve unanimous consensus on everyone, or at least close to that. And we need to quantitatively measure all that. But that's all the stuff we're working on with canonizer.com. And I think if we could achieve something like that, that would be sweet.
Well, there's several processes. One process is coming to a consensus of what the change should be. And then the second process is, should the change be implemented? So you almost need to get it down into, well, by creating this token, the token can vote for any number of camps, if you will, and whenever any camp can achieve 75%, whatever that camp decided on gets implemented. More camps there are, the harder it is going to be for any one camp to achieve it. But we don't have to define what the camps are. The way I look at it from a technical point of view is every asset, every user-issued asset, will be able to vote for a slate, and that slate will not be for delegates, but for proposals, for changes. And so you can vote for one or more slates, so you simultaneously be in multiple camps. But the main issue is that for every major voting decision, there needs to be a new token issued that restores the power back to the original BTS holder. Whoever holds the BTS, they get to decide, right? When you sell your vote on some issue, you're not selling it for all issues. We don't want to create two classes of shares, voting shares and non-voting shares. Although that would be interesting, I think that divorces you're basically selling your property rights, and then when you have BTS, when you buy BTS, you're not buying voting rights, which means you have a separate thing. If you want voting rights, you have to buy that, and then voting rights are going to trade separately from regular rights. Who knows? Maybe that's an idea. I haven't thought about the consequences of that. If anyone has any thoughts on that, it might help achieve consensus more efficiently if we have voting rights for big changes in the hands of different people than the shareholders. And if you want both, you have to buy both. It's kind of like mining rights versus water rights versus surface rights of real estate. Do we want to divide up the rights and allow them to trade separately? And what are the implications of that?
Out of curiosity, along with the kind of the camp mentality that Canonizer uses, I've taken into consideration a lot of things with regard to this voting concept, and I've often found myself ending up at the point where there are many people I trust who I know are more knowledgeable in certain areas where I might feel inclined to give them my vote at a certain, with respect to certain issues. And
I'm not totally following why. To me, it seems like we're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I don't understand why we can't just allow people to register a statement just like they would register an asset, and then whoever wants to vote yes or no on that statement can do so. I think that would be really useful to the DAC. You can just poll, you can write any kind of random thing, and if it's just something random and silly and pointless, people don't have to respond to it. If it's something interesting, people will vote yes or they'll vote no on it. And I think it would give people a good idea of what the actual stake feels about something. I don't understand. I don't see why we need tokens. I don't understand why we need to be buying and selling votes or having camps. I just think something simple like that would be really, really useful.
And it might be for certain things, but the question I guess I have is, are there going to be issues where that's not enough?
For one, we're now talking about the SuperDAC with multiple functions. So it's no longer a single thing, no single company.
I think it's still a single company because you're still everybody has it's still Bitshares. That's still one thing. Bitshares are fungible. The shares in the overall company are fungible, so it's still one thing. I think you could make a SuperDAC where you could introduce tokens. You could introduce sort of sub DACs, and those tokens function like shares of a micro company. And those people are doing something separate, and they have their own voting rights. But that's a separate thing. When you're talking about the decisions and the functions of the whole company, you may as well just allow people to register a statement and allow everybody to vote on it.
I would like to point out that the only benefit of selling votes is that you can convince people to change their vote in exchange for compensation, which allows you to reach a higher level of consensus than just 51%. That's the only benefit to what I'm suggesting. And if you do that for major issues, I certainly don't want to do that for all issues. And for 99% of things, it can come down to here's a delegate, they think we need to change X, Y, and Z. They're going to be responsible for marketing and heading up and implementing the change. If that delegate gets elected and they have enough votes and enough approval, then we already know what the community thinks. We already hired someone to implement it. It gets implemented. Now the question is, should all the other delegates adopt it? Well, if that one delegate could get in there with that approval, anyone who doesn't support the change is going to get voted out. So the delegate system already allows us to vote for most small things. The only time we need some kind of super voting solution where we need to achieve 75% or greater consensus is for major changes. And I don't think we want to have or contemplate major changes anytime in the near future. We need to focus on our core technology, and we have all the tools we need for the short term or medium term, next year or two, to focus on bitAssets and making that a reality. All the other wild ideas where we need massive consensus that can't be handled by approval of a delegate probably shouldn't even be considered. Should be off the table.
Sure. I think for some applications, voting via approving and disapproving delegates is a very, very, it's extremely indirect way of figuring out how people feel about one specific issue. You're complicating it. If you were able just to make a statement and then poll people and then get on the forums and say, hey, express your opinion about XYZ. I registered this statement. It's obviously completely non-binding. It doesn't force a hard fork or force anybody to do anything. To actually do something, you need, of course, delegates and developers to cooperate to do something. But it's just a way of actually, learning about what the shareholders feel about certain things. And I think it would just be fun, beyond even just getting consensus. You can just make up stupid polls and find out about your fellow shareholders. And to me, it doesn't seem complicated, but.
Well,
H86, let me ask you this for a sec. To me, the most important use case is the whole herd is like, take the example of mining. The whole Bitshares herd, Bitcoin herd thinks mining is critically important. But there's 3 or 4 experts, you, Bytemaster, and everyone else, that recognize that proof of work is not a good thing to go not a good way to go. And so the thing is the few experts that see that are in the minority. So the important thing becomes, how does that set of small experts that's growing but is still less than 10% of the population, how do they get their message out? How do they educate the whole crowd and do things like Bytemaster is talking about, offer to the people against it, offer them something so they can get them on board and achieve a whole, and basically how do you make that herd change directions on a dime without people bailing and getting mad and upset and leaving just because they're ignorant?
I don't think you have to get people to change on a dime. I don't think there's a shortcut to that. You just have to, if people don't realize something, you just have to talk to them and argue and convince them.
All right, let's bring this back and answer questions from Reddit. I hope someone has those questions, because I don't.
Yes, I have them. The first question would be, what is the current plan of allocation for SuperDAC, which would be BTS? Is it final now? May you reconsider it if there are many people who complain about it? Shouldn't PTSers and AGSers get their 10% of what are originally promised?
We have a newsletter that's being drafted. You can imagine it's been a very complicated thing to draft because we want to address as many things as possible. But it comes down to a simple, relatively simple explanation. PTS is getting 7% from November 5th, 1% from October 21st, or August 21st, whatever the vote snapshot was. And 1%. I can go through there and add it all up, but it comes down to PTS is getting on the order of 9.3 to 9.5%. AGS is getting the same deal. So then we have this extra little bit of PTS and AGS. They got 9 point something instead of 10, but they also got all of Bitshares X and the core product line. When their main things, DNS, vote, and other ideas probably wouldn't see the light of day for 2 years because of our desire to focus on core technology rather than focus on building those smaller applications in the short term. So we're laying out the exact numbers for each one, but if you view PTS and AGS as getting, their stake just spread over several different dates of the PTS snapshot, then there is effectively over 9% of everything, plus everything in the past. So as far as the allocation, the 7-7-3-3 approach with AGS, PTS, vote, and DNS is what we're going with, simply because we do not want to change things, and any significant changes to that distribution will piss off everyone who's been trading based upon that distribution.
All right. No one else has any questions regarding that?
So I know this has been sort of beat to death, but what is your current feeling about if a third party wanted to honor the community? Do you have a feeling about how they should go about doing that? If they brought something, if they wanted to create a deck that was really unique or different in a lot of ways, and they didn't want to just, work for BTS. How is there a way that you feel they should honor the community, or you think they should just work for BTS and integrate it into that, or what's your feeling?
My feeling is that if you are going to take someone's contributions and work of others, you can copy it, do whatever you want, and not recognize them, and people will say, "Oh, okay, you're just stealing all this, and now you're going to go compete." You probably won't get much traction. On the other hand, if you say, "Hey, I'm going to recognize these people with a gift, a tip, for producing this wonderful free software with no strings attached, so that I can have their support, and as a thank you, you'll start off your new system with a much better foundation, much better feel to it." It won't, I think that each individual who's starting one of these projects, and I think the community at large needs to understand what developers are actually facing when they're making these decisions. They're taking a lot of risk. They're pouring a lot of time and effort into building a system that they get relatively little stake in. All of our developers here could, for the most part, work at any other job, a more secure job, a job that could potentially pay them more, and just buy BTS and allow someone else to do the work. So the incentives aren't aligned for the high risk, high reward. And so that needs to change. And so when someone's trying to create a new DAC, I don't think we should judge them at all. It's their baby. They need to find financial incentives that motivate them and allow them to grow. And I think that tipping or recognizing the people that made the foundation of your software possible is a good thing to do. It shows that you're appreciative, that you're not greedy, and that Yeah, so I definitely think that tipping the founders is good. I don't think we should require or specify anything in particular that any developer must or must not do, simply because it was never enforceable. There were always recommendations. And the 10-10 recommendation, or 20% to any combination of AGS, PTS, BTS, I think is a fair tip. It's like a tip at a restaurant. You give them 20%. You can stiff everyone in our community, and you'll have a whole bunch of people say, hey, you just stole our stuff and are trying to profit from it. But you know what? It doesn't matter if they steal our stuff if they have solid marketing and solid team and solid developers, and they're able to pull it off without our approval. Then they just outcompeted us, and that's the challenge that we face. So I definitely think that the 20% should be allocated to some combination of BTS, AGS, and PTS as a sign of good faith, but requiring that is not something we can do.
Second question is, now the SuperDAC is going to be released in late November. Will it refine the UI in the first place and integrate DNS and vote later on? Will this schedule be delayed? And I guess another question here that I'm going to draw from this is it going to be released, or is the snapshot just in November?
The DAC's going to be evolving over time. The snapshot happens November 5th. Shortly thereafter, a version of the wallet will be released that renames BTSX to BTS, removes PTS, provides the new Genesis balances with vesting interest, and reduces the fees for user-issued assets. As far as how many changes are going to change in the interface, that's going to be an evolving process over many months. The features of DNS and vote. DNS features are put on hold. We're stretching ourselves too thin. Nikolai Toast is working on the BTS merger, not working on DNS at this point in time. This is one of the benefits we get. We could not do this without the help of people like Nikolai. And you can see that if he was working on DNS, then who would be doing the merger? Who would be doing the other things that need to be done? So as far as vote is concerned, a demo is being prepared, proof of concept, for the California voting officials, and that demo is going to be, and there's a hard deadline on that demo for December, and that's an independent effort that Adam and some other developers are working on, but not our web guys. So Vikram, Nikolai, and myself are working on, as well as Valentin, are working on the combined Bitshares rebranding. Once we get the hard fork merger done and the stakes all allocated, then we will focus on individual features of DNS and vote, as well as Turing completeness, adding generic scripting ability to the blockchain. The generic scripting ability is actually probably going to be our highest priority, because it will allow us to rapidly prototype and deploy new features without hard forking, and give people a greater sense of stability for the overall protocol, and allow third parties to experiment with their own ideas without having to wait for us to approve a hard fork. So lightweight clients, lightweight clients are the priority of a lot of things we're doing after the hard fork. That means we've already got some of the infrastructure in place. We've got the mail server that's being tested and used and is somewhat available right now in Bitshares X from the console. We've got James Caffey working on processing the encrypted messages from the mail server via JavaScript. This will be necessary to first step toward it, lightweight clients. There is someone on the forum who has started working on an exchange lightweight client, and he'll probably want to work with James and some of the other web guys on those features. And Valentin has produced a version of the wallet that is web-based, multi-user. Everyone can log into a website and use it, but it keeps the private keys on the server. And it looks just like our regular wallet, except it's one account per user. That particular solution currently doesn't scale terribly well to thousands and tens of thousands of users because of the way Titan is functioning. But once we, these are all things we're doing toward supporting lighter weight clients.
Thanks for the answer. I think that you answered the third question. The fourth question is, well, we've covered what the progress of Brian is last week.
Hold on a second. I'd like to clarify one thing on that. Someone asked, when I say lightweight clients, do I mean blockchain.info style? That is one type of lightweight client. I also mean Electrum style.
Does anybody else have any questions before I move on?
Yes. Bytemaster, I want to ask you about the 10% inflation per year. The Chinese community is crazy about this 10%. Can you elaborate on the 10%?
It's 50 BTS per block, which works out to be less than 8% maximum. That only happens if 101 delegates are all elected with 100% pay rate. In reality, we are probably going to only have 25% of the delegates elected with 100% pay rate from core devs and marketing folks. So I think in reality, you'll probably see 2% or so inflation or dilution to fund development that should cause Bitshares to grow by more than 2%. So the only question they need to ask themselves is, does paying these people cause the value to grow by more than 2% per year? And with cryptocurrencies, it's insane to think that if you hire a developer or a set of developers who build a web wallet and get it deployed for the masses, that it's not going to increase the value by 2%. Even if we hired 100 people and we were doing a full 50 BTS per block, it's going to be 8%. It's still less than Bitcoin. And of course, that's only if the majority of stakeholders approve of delegates doing that. So I think it's relatively benign and actually hugely beneficial for the entire Bitshares ecosystem.
So can you emphasize the 2% on the forum instead of 10%, because people don't understand why 10% could be 2%,
Right. So one is the hard-coded limit that, it doesn't matter how you vote, no one can vote for more than 8%. So that's one aspect, but then there's the practical reality. I can't guarantee 2%. I can only guarantee from the code that 8% is the max. I think people have to look at, in reality, all right, how do things actually get voted? And then you can make your decision based upon how things are actually voted. So for my part, the developers that we have here are going to be, at least for the next 6 months or so, restricted to one delegate each, as far as I'm concerned. They can have multiple delegates if they can convince other people to vote for them. But, at today's valuation, one delegate each is less than $30K a year. So that's nothing. Developers make 4 times that for their skills. And that's just for their time. If you want to reward them with equity so they have a vested interest in success versus moving to a lower risk project elsewhere, they probably need to make even more than that. But that's the stance on inflation.
So if in reality we don't vote for those high pay rates, then inflation will be very low.
Yeah, the effective dilution rate will be very low. None of our marketing materials are going to advertise 10%. 10% was a number thrown out as a, here's the reality of the situation. The ability to dilute to pay developers is limited fundamentally by the ability of the market to find buyers for Bitshares. If you dilute at 100%, there's no way the developers will be able to sell their stake at those prices, and the price will fall. So you want to make sure that the dilution rate is at a rate that the market can actually bear, and at the rate that you're actually growing. If you start diluting faster than you're growing, the share price is going to be suppressed. And you're not actually able to pay much more. So we are fully aware that the market, the free market, is in complete control over our budget and how much you can spend. I would also like to point out that from a outside perspective, if you want a cryptocurrency that you don't have to worry about people printing or diluting or the governance thereof, get bit gold, bit silver, or bit any commodity, and hold that and promote that as the currency that has no printing press, no ability for anyone to create. It's market pegged to those things. And the holders of Bitshares, BTS, have financial incentive to make sure that those things continue to maintain their purchasing power and that the collateral does not fall too fast. Any rate of dilution that we are talking about is well within the realm of the collateral of Bitshares to handle, the collateral behind BitGold and BitSilver to handle. So those are what we want to promote as currency. The problem we have in this space is everyone wants to buy a fixed supply currency like Bitcoin is theoretically, but in reality is not. Everyone wants to buy it on the expectation of appreciation. If you buy BitGold and BitSilver, well, you're buying it at a high value, right? $1,000 per BitGold, assuming gold's $1,000. And you can't expect to have Bitcoin style price gains on something like that. So the idea of having huge price gains for a currency without any inflation is ridiculous, particularly if you need to have lots of development to provide infrastructure for that currency. So I would strongly recommend that the Chinese community carefully consider the DAC metaphor, carefully consider what would happen if they had a startup company that the initial shareholders allocated 100% to themselves, and then they wanted to grow, and now they need more money. What are they to do to get more money? Are they to expect one of the founders to spend their own personal money for the benefit of the other founders? Are they to expect others to invest their own money in other businesses instead of the core business? Everyone needs to contribute to common costs that benefit the common growth. And if you have that metaphor and that mindset, then what we are proposing is not wrong, it's not immoral, it is the only way to avoid tragedy of the commons.
Thank you for the clarification. Someone asked when can the encrypted email can release the GUI?
The UI for that is something we're going to be working on as soon as we get the UI rebranded to Bitshares.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Fathom29 would like to hear your thoughts on competing BitAssets from third-party chains, even after the merger is still. Is this still relevant, or is it not?
Third-party chains can, of course, implement their own BitAssets. In theory, Ripple and Next could do that too. And Bitcoin could, in theory, adopt and implement it. These BitAssets are no different than having multiple banks, each issuing their own dollar IOUs. You then need some way of transferring value between banks. There's atomic cross-chain trading and so on and so forth, but they will be competing for users' deposits. They'll be competing on interest rate, they'll be competing on liquidity, on user base. It's much cheaper and easier to send money to another Bank of America customer if you bank with Bank of America than sending it to a JP Morgan customer or some small credit union somewhere. So that is the nature of BitAssets. And cross-chain trading is what banks are currently doing to do cross-bank settlement. They will probably be implemented in a very similar way in the future. Perhaps with the help of delegates coordinating it, perhaps with some superstructure like the SWIFT system that helps people move value between them. But the bitUSD on one is not equal to a bitUSD on the other. Just like USD in one bank is not equal to the USD in another bank. They have different interest rates, they have different liquidity, they have different fees, and they have different restrictions on how you can move money in and out. So yes, they'll compete. We want to focus our efforts so we're not competing against ourselves to make us better positioned to compete against others.
Xerox mentioned this is essentially the same concept that'll be at play between BTS and music and BTS and gaming, play rather. Is this correct?
Yes, so the music DAC will have its own bitUSD separate from our bitUSD. And the gameplay DAC will also, I haven't verified this, but I suspect it should have gold, silver, and dollars on it as well. So each of those has their own purpose, and I suspect that merchants aren't going to want to take bitUSD from a game DAC or from a music DAC. They're going to want to take it from the main DAC. And that most of the network effect will be built around the main USD. But these other USDs are still useful for their respective companies, for their respective customers. Because USD on their systems is a stable place to be without having to wire transfer to another bank. It's like buying chips at a casino. You get once you have your chips, now it's really easy to play games without having to worry about the price of your chips fluctuating.
And then you can cash them in for $4 at the end of the night.
Yes. So I don't really see that as a threat unless they decide that they're going to do gaming on the side and try to mass market and market better than we are for getting merchant adoption. But bitUSD on play and music is meant to be the local internal chips to make life easier for the users. It's store credit.
Will the bitUSD on play and music still being called bitUSD?
I am going to strongly suggest that they call it Play USD and Note USD.
This, I guess, would be a good place to mention the next Reddit post, and I think we've largely covered Reddit after this. This is a very pertinent one, in my opinion. When will the DNS function be launched? And then the third one would be, what is the effect of the investigation of the SEC to I3?
SEC has not contacted us as far as I am aware at this point in time. Who knows what's in the mail? And that is a threat that we have known about from the beginning. Is always a potential that the SEC will consider something we're doing interesting and want to investigate to see if we have violated any provisions. We have tried our best to be compliant with the law at all points in time. We are not looking to violate any laws. We are trying our best to get clarity on what the law actually is, and from what we can tell, their law is extremely ambiguous. So, as far as I3 is concerned, the AGS fundraiser was donations, no strings attached. We said we could do anything we wanted with the funds and that we were not obligated to produce anything for anyone. We did let people know what we were passionate about and what we wanted to build. But of course we had no obligation to do anything of any sort. No legal obligation. That was our intent, that was our stance, that continues to be our stance. Despite what we insist, many users and people out there may perceive things differently, and the SEC may perceive things differently. And we'll have to work that out with the SEC if and when that time comes. So we have been working with accountants and lawyers to be compliant in every way possible. Someone asked a question about the music IPO and the legal problem there. The Bitshares music team has already been in contact with the SEC and gotten a no action letter, as far as I know, saying that the SEC considers their particular application and fundraiser approved by the SEC. So I don't think they will have a problem, but it's the SEC and the government, you never know what they will do. So that's what we have there.
I have a question about branding. Do you think it's strange for branding that we're calling it Bitshares now, and then we still have Bitshares Music and Bitshares Play? Are we going to try to convince others to not put Bitshares in front of their name anymore?
Yes, Bitshares Music is PeerTracks powered by Bitshares. I think the powered by Bitshares toolkit is what I'm going to ask third parties to do to avoid confusion and to strengthen their own brand. They don't necessarily want to rise and fall with us, or to have people out there think that they are managed by the same team or elected by have the same set of delegates. So I think the powered by Bitshares, kind of like powered by Intel, is how I'm going to ask third parties who use the toolkit if they want to reference Bitshares in their system, should do it.
Are there any considerations for trademarking?
We have applied for the Bitshares trademark, and we were rejected on the same grounds as Bitcoin. namely that it was too descriptive, according to them, that Bitcoin was rejected and we're similar enough to Bitcoin that we cannot get the trademark and no one can get the trademark on Bitshares.
How does that work exactly? What do they mean it's too descriptive?
It makes no sense to me. These are paper pushers out there and bureaucrats. The only time Bitshares was ever used was by me. Every single use case that they cited when they replied to us was something I said or I3 said or was talking about us. And yet they still held that it's too descriptive, that it's in use out there. And it more or less boiled down to, if someone can't trademark Bitcoin because Bitcoin is too descriptive, then Bitshares is equally descriptive.
I suspect if you had enough money, you may be able to appeal it if you really put your ducks in a row, but I could be wrong.
And the Mormon Church has been trying to trademark Mormon forever, so good luck with that.
In some aspects, no one being able to get the trademark is better than having a centralized entity get the trademark, particularly because we want this to be a decentralized system. And if people feel that no one can own the trademark, then you can't claim that the owner of the trademark owns the Bitshares and is then liable for it. So it actually kind of works out well that they decide that no one can get it.
So bottom line is, in the same way that people that want to copy the Bitcoin brand and blockchain technology label their product as a Bitcoin thingy, we can't dictate that some third-party DAC can't use Bitshares in their name if that's what they want to do.
Right, but it's really poor marketing to intentionally try to confuse the user. You have to convince your user base that the confusion of the brand that you're intentionally doing is worthwhile. It'd be like someone coming out with a phone and calling it the iPhone, assuming that iPhone was declared too descriptive. Wait, no, everyone knows the iPhone is Apple, and if you try to launch that, then the person who does the copycat is going to be seen for what they are, and that's going to have really big brand implications for them. So people trying to launch a DAC want to establish a unique brand, and copycats are going to have a major hurdle in the market. Just like if I created, instead of calling it Bitshares, you called it Bitcoin 2.0, and we tried to promote it as Bitcoin 2.0, what do you think would happen?
I see your point.
I'm probably alone in this, and I think this decision has already been made and already been discussed to death. But I don't know. My personal opinion was Bitshares X was a good name, and I don't know. I'm a little personally disappointed to rush to get rid of it in favor of a generic Bitshares. I feel like Bitshares is a little too generic, and we should have. And it was nice to have Bitshares X focused on the exchange and financial aspect, and I think allowing third parties to use Bitshares in their name, Bitshares blank, as long as they, honored the community, I think that had some advantages in terms of encouraging people to honor the community, whereas not allowing people to do that, I don't know. Anyway, that's my opinion, but I know that decision has already passed.
I agree.
Yeah. Why is Apple not too descriptive? Why is Windows not too descriptive? Yes, if you have type of money and brand power of Microsoft and Apple, you can get anything trademarked, more or less. When you're a small company in an industry the government doesn't like, good luck.
Does anybody else have any questions before we move forward?
Yes. I want to ask when can we expect the market engine add a short Bitshares X function?
So shorting Bitshares X, which is really a similar function to shorting anything backed by anything, is not something we want to do in the short term. I think we need to get a solid foundation around our current infrastructure and then add more market engine features, thoroughly test them in the dev network, and then merge them into Bitshares. I think the shifting of the market engine every time we do it, it's really hard to test and catch all the edge cases, and it delays when we can mass market bitUSD. What we have now is I'm going to call good enough to get 90% of the utility. Adding more features takes just as much work as everything we've already implemented, but only gives us 10% more marketing power value proposition. So it's something I'd like to work on, but probably not until after we've already done a scripting interface for the entire system.
This was asked earlier, and I didn't want to kind of fork our conversation off of topic because we've been talking around a few general points. But this one was asked actually in the chat, and it says here, it's regarding delegates. Currently, how do we measure the contribution of a delegate? I mean, not just provide a stable block creation, but the real contribution of the whole system or community. Do you have any thoughts on this?
It's very hard to measure because how do you measure the value of anything? It's all subjective. Each person is going to perceive the value of someone's contribution differently. If they're a developer, you can look at their GitHub commits. But then again, we have developers now making more commits than I'm making because I've been busy doing a bunch of other things. How do you value time spent debugging to make a one-line change? How do you value time spent designing on whiteboards, or time spent in meetings, marketing, building business partners? It's very hard to value or do in an objective manner. Each delegate will have to do their best to say, hey, this is what I've been doing, and these are the results I've gotten. And maybe they take credit for things that aren't theirs, right? Say, hey, I did this marketing campaign, Bitshares went up. And so I said, no, that was this other guy's marketing campaign. Who actually caused it to go up? We don't know for sure. But those who are able to provide more transparency and better proof are more likely to stay in, especially if there's controversy. As people start saying, hey, I don't see what you're doing, you're going to get voted out. With that in mind, it's pretty clear to me that Ryan Page and co need to up their transparency, because I'm pretty sure that if it was up to a vote of the community, they might be voted out. They're staying in there because I have a little bit more transparency and I've been talking with them, so I still support them. But eventually my supporting them is not going to be good enough. They need to convince everyone out there that they need to do it and that they're producing results. What that likely means is they have to produce results and then get elected, rather than get elected and then produce results.
I had a question regarding delegates that kind of ties in with what you were saying. You recently voted in 4 delegates that the community had never heard of, and you basically posted that you voted them in over, I guess, anybody else, simply because they were up to date. Do you think, you were talking about transparency and things like that, and then we have you just here recently voting 4 people in that were completely unknown to the community? It's kind of mixed signals.
Right now, delegates are only being paid enough to run the server. I care about one thing: are they producing blocks and are they running the right version? and that's the only criteria that I'm looking at, I guess, other than other different people. I looked through the list of people that had published their versions, and I unvoted people who hadn't published a new version, and I voted in people who had published a new version. So as things progress, you can bet that I'm not going to vote for a paid delegate position for someone who I don't know who they are or what they're doing, and it's not intentional. With the current system, delegates are paid just enough to cover their hosting. If the delegates are running really beefy servers, then it might not be enough to cover their hosting. So that's why it wasn't as important as long as they were doing the job of producing blocks. In the future, the only way I'm going to be voting in paid delegates is with huge amounts of transparency.
That makes complete sense, and I wish you would have maybe said that in the thread, because I think there was even some members from the Chinese community that came on, and I'm surprised more people didn't get upset by it. But that makes sense. It was just kind of a short-term fix because it doesn't matter as much now. I had one other question. With the merger kind of just around the corner, the privately held company i3 registered in Hong Kong, is that going to be dissolved, or has it already been dissolved, or is it going to continue on?
That is a topic of discussion that requires careful communication because a lot of people are worried about i3's existence. Generally speaking, I said at the beginning of this that the i3 has accomplished its mission, its purpose. It's built and delivered Bitshares and given it life and ability to grow on its own. There is no longer any need for a centralized company to hire employees to work for it, to run these things. I don't want anyone to have the impression that there exists some company, i3, out there looking to get rich off of their centralized control of what should be a decentralized system. So we are looking at phasing out i3 and phasing in decentralized management and development of Bitshares as an international project without any corporate entity officially being responsible for it.
Do you think that there's going to be any problems or kind of fallout from initial investors that you had in that company? I mean, I think it makes perfect sense from a legal standpoint. You can't sue a company that doesn't exist, so to speak. But do you think there's going to be any fallout from doing that?
All investors in i3 are in agreement to it, and every investor has or will be made whole. So that's between us and them. But i3 investors are not, do not feel, as far as I know, like they've been harmed in any way, shape, or form.
All right, thank you.
Have we ever considered the possibility or the merits of having delegate that maybe pays toward legal funds for other delegates who are in certain jurisdictions whenever something does happen?
My preference is if there is a legal battle and the shareholders want to support community members, that we elect a legal delegate and you vote for that delegate, and if they get in, that delegate can then fund the legal expenses associated with defending individuals. You then have the insurance of the entire DAC backing you, but I don't want to have a blank check or have any party. Here's the primary thing I want to avoid. I want to avoid having any funds held on behalf of third parties, whether they're deposits, whether they're escrow, or insurance funds. someone has to hold that money, and anytime you do that, that creates regulatory complications potentially. So if people feel that we all want to defend one another and defend delegates, because if you don't defend delegates, then you're going to have less people willing to be delegates if there's any legal risk to delegates. So I think it's definitely in the best interest of our community and Bitshares stakeholders to support the legal defense of delegates as far as the role of being a delegate is concerned. But then again, we can't guarantee or promise that. So the goal is to have all funds belong to the people that control them with no strings attached. And just like the AGS funds were given to me, no strings attached, I want to take those funds and give them to people whom I trust, who believe and are passionate in this project, who are going to make a multi-year commitment to see this through. That's the most robust way I know of dealing with these funds. If I maintain complete control over AGS funds, then if there is a government order that, I did something wrong, they could seize the funds from me, they could compel me to give up the private keys, and those types of things. But if the funds are in the hands of developers who do not raise funds via AGS, then that's a completely separate matter. It's much harder, much more robust. We don't have to worry about any single point of failure, but you get 99% of the same result that you would get. But we're working on the best way to explain the complex motivations of what we're doing and to do things in a legal way.
Kind of to piggyback off of your mention of AGS, RHAG and Tony K have asked what will happen to the AGS funds. And RHAG also said, will there be transparency on how AGS is distributed?
Yes, I tend to provide transparency on that. So when I do distributions on the AGS funds that we have, that will be done in a transparent manner. After I give up control of the funds, what happens from that point on is not transparent. It belongs to the people I give the funds to, and they have no obligation to maintain their transparency. It will be their money for the purposes of motivating them to develop and contribute to the project.
Hey, Bytemaster, I have a question. I wonder whether it is possible to add the dividend function in the coming SuperDAC. I mean, right now, if the asset creator wants to pay dividends to the shareholders, he has to do the following two things. One is collecting all the addresses that has this asset. Two is sending the dividends to all the addresses. If we do it this way, the blockchain will charge a lot of fees. That's expensive.
I recommend that companies do buybacks rather than dividends as a way of distributing value to their stakeholders if you are doing an asset like that. If you want to do a distribution like that, there's no way of getting around the fact that the blockchain needs to increase the number of balance records and divide the funds you wish to send among those balance records, which means you need to tell it what those balance records are, which means creating a big transaction. Paying dividends out is a mass mailing. Mass mailings should not be discounted or encouraged relative to single payments. So if you want to do things more efficiently and the cost of doing it is so high, companies should either have some kind of minimum threshold for the amount to get your dividend, or it should do buyback and burn. as the preferred way of redistributing value. Buyback and burn is much better from a tax perspective in the United States because now you're not getting income, you're getting capital appreciation. But yes, there are many use cases out there, and you have to look at the total cost of the operation is the same whether we make it one transaction or 1,000 transactions.
Okay, so I was just thinking about it in regards to delegates. It's just in a general philosophy, in the sense that there's, like currently I can say there's 101. Are we going to put in place some type of process, or should we have a process where how we add more delegates, or it's going to be or is it just always going to be you vote on adding more delegates? I mean, expanding more than 101, because maybe we might get to a point where 101 it might not be enough. I mean, it seems like a lot now, but there's going to be some type of dynamic system or a voting system put in place for adding delegates.
This is one of those scaling things. Adding more delegates increases the size of all transactions that are voting and increases the load that people have to do when they're deciding to vote on delegates. I think you scale long term by having more than one person under each delegate. Have one person be responsible for running the delegate, and they hire other people underneath them to do it. That one person takes responsibility for getting the work done. They'll be much more productive because they have a team working for them than if they're just by themselves. But you don't want to have, you can't grow to thousands of delegates. The transaction sizes and the voting would be untenable.
Okay, I mean that's how I looked at it before. So I know people have an argument about delegate being one person or being multiple people, but we should look at delegates more as many companies in themselves working for Bitshares or subsidiaries in a sense.
You guys can continue to talk. I'm going to head off now. Thanks everyone for your questions. I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Bytemaster. What are your thoughts? If Google or somebody like JP Morgan or some huge company decided that they wanted to run a delegate, how does the community feel about that?
I think they're more interested in running their own clone.
Well, it'd just be a matter of voting. I mean, if the community voted for them in, then there wouldn't be much we could do about it. I wouldn't think, if we're really going to be honoring the consensus that I'm aware of at this point. But I don't think right now that the community would vote such people or such companies or whatever into place.
Yeah, that's my question exactly. If someone attempted something like that, would the community, Bytemaster and all the big shareholders, would they vote them in, or how would they view that?
I see it depends. For me personally, for my voting behavior, it would depend on, first of all, if they wanted to have a pay rate higher than the burn rate of the transaction fees, if they want to earn money, or if they just want to contribute to the network. For example, if they wanted to have a 0% delegate, then I would basically have no issue voting a single delegate for them in, unless they are not doing a good job. If they are producing blogs and publishing feeds and doing all the jobs that are necessary for delegate, I would be fine. If they wanted to instead have a delegate with higher pay rate, say, no idea, 10% or more, then I need to know what they're doing with it and whether this is good for the network.
The scenario I'm talking about, Google, the finances you're getting from one delegate would be completely insignificant for any reason they would want to get involved. So I would assume they would do it for free and burn everything they made.
Also keep in mind that Google already is invested in Ripple.
I also heard
interesting. I didn't know that.
No, me neither.
Yeah, they have this, well, not directly, they have an investment company or something investing in the Ripple Labs. But I think the big guys won't be interested in running a delegate. I think they will be like Overstock. They will want to own the system and the developers, because they're currently in the habit of owning everything they do already.
I'm wholly in agreement with that. That I believe that will be the strategy they would take as well.
Which is why I would oppose it under any circumstances. And I don't think they wouldn't attempt it that way anyways. They would definitely be doing it more covertly than just coming out and saying, this is JP Morgan, we want to run a delegate.
Hi, all you libertarians who hate us, vote for us.
Yeah, good luck on that one.
Well, the only thing that everybody needs to consider to kind of put it in perspective, when I talked about Bytemaster voting in those 4 delegates, with just his shares, his stake alone, he was able to take some unknowns, people that weren't even in the running, and put them in the top 10 of the list just with his stake
But
alone. So it only takes one holder to break.
But that's just that's not his personal stake. That's the AGS stake, and that he told us just
Right,
a few minutes ago.
he has
will-
control of the AGS stake.
Yeah, and this stake is the big stake, and once he distributes that stake to whoever, I have no idea, then the power of that stake will be a lot, diminished.
Also,
I
does
am
anybody
more
know?
afraid. I'm a
sorry.
lot more afraid about what exchanges are doing, but I think that's in the hands of people that have their funds lie around on exchanges.
I'm curious to know if it's already been measured how much of the stake is active. So has everybody made their claims already, or are they waiting for a working wallet?
There's a number about how many unclaimed stakes are still in the Genesis. I can figure it out. Let me take a look.
I'm pretty sure when they figured it out before, it was pretty high, that there was still a lot of unclaimed shares floating around.
So in that case,
I've got a pretty significant bunch, and I have claimed mine, but I haven't voted any of my shares for any delegates yet.
So it's your fault that Bytemaster has so much power.
Yep, but I plan on in the future exercising it when I need to. Right now I trust Bytemaster, so I'm not much interested in it.
Well, at least we know who to punish. If Bytemaster does something wrong, we will punish you.
What's a significant stake?
Oh, not. It's like 1%, something like. It's not big.
Okay,
That's like asking someone how much they have in their wallet.
That is significant for me. This is pretty significant already.
It's almost like asking a woman how old she is.
Yeah, that's kind of it's a taboo question.
Yeah, the question is, the issue is you don't really know how much people own. And you don't really, because people are afraid of huge stakeholders, and no one really knows what a huge stakeholder really means.
Yeah, so what you mean is at what point is a stake big enough to actually make waves in this...
or be considered a big stakeholder. So in that terms, I'm far away from being a big stakeholder.
But yeah, there aren't, as far as I've been able to tell, it's mostly just rumors, but there are no big stakeholders. The biggest stakeholder is the I3 stake that Bytemaster has control of. And Bytemaster doesn't have anything close to that as his own personal shares. But I don't think anyone has anywhere close to that stake. And that huge stake is about to be divided up. So I don't think there's anyone that has more than 5% vote.
I know when PTS was mined, there was a lot of flaws in its difficulty functions, and because of that, a lot of miners in the very beginning were able to get large amounts of BTSX by holding their PTS. I'm gonna bet that there's more than a few people out there that have, between 3 and 6%. You figure it takes 7% right now to get on the top 101. And I'd almost guarantee that there's a few people that have 3% plus stakes.
Right, but no one close to 10%, right?
Probably not 10%, but if it only takes 7, at least using the Bitshares X model to get you on as a delegate. I think what my biggest fear is that it's going to become like political parties, okay, where friends are voting in friends. Delegates are forming small conglomerates where you can get say two holders that have say 2% stakes each, and then a couple other guys, or one guy that just starts rallying a couple smaller fish to him. I mean, even you with say 1%. If we take you at face value, you're 1%. You're already a good fraction of the way there, and then you can use that as generating a stream of passive income, even though you're not a developer or anything. You know what I mean? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Right.
it's not that I think that you would actually do that. I'm just using it as kind of like a case study. It's just I think there's a lot of value in delegates being developers, but the amount that we'd be paying them is laughable for a developer salary. So I'm more worried that we're going to attract people that have a little bit of money and are just going to kind of use it as just a passive income generator.
Yeah, one of the things I'm worrying about is if you see these delegates like senators, then the political party structure needs to be prevented. So these need to be separate entities in that sense, and not these grouped political parties.
I think just with the way people are naturally, they're already starting to form groups. You can look at some of the names and you can tell. Just like I said, using the Bitshares X model, certain ones are most likely. The names are very similar. I tried to run for a delegate long time ago, and I was approached by different people in different communities where parties were already formed, and this was months ago when Bitshares X first came out. Now we've attracted even more money. We're merging DACs. I think it's just naive to think that this won't happen.